Hey everyone, and welcome to the Fandea Fabric Sew Along. My name is Abigail, a strike sewist for Fandea, and I will be sewing with you this week. So this sew along will be making the Lotte hoodie by Sinclair Patterns, and you can find that on their site. A link will also be posted below if you do need that. So today is day one, and we're going to talk about the supplies you'll need, sizing, printing, piecing, and cutting. And by the end of today, you'll have all your pieces cut and ready to start sewing. So let's start with the supplies you're going to need. You're going to want a mid to heavyweight knit fabric, and you're going to want it to have at least 20 to 30% horizontal stretch and 10 to 20% vertical stretch. And a few good examples would be like a cotton spandex or a French terry. Just make sure that it has the correct stretch. And a lot of fabric companies do list the stretch in the descriptions. I am going to be mixing my fabrics, and I will be using a French terry panel as well as a French terry mane, and I'm going to be using a cotton spandex print and a cotton spandex solids. So these three fabrics are from Oh So Pretty, and this is a French terry that will be running on a pre-order at Fandea sometime in April, so just keep a lookout for that because it's beautiful and that round is going to be awesome. You're also going to need some stretch needles, and I would strongly advise staying away from universal needles. You want it to be a stretch needle, and I'm using these Schmetz 7511s. You're obviously going to want some threads, and you can match that with your fabrics. If you are going to be doing the drawstrings on the hood, you can use some grommets, or you could do buttonholes. If you are doing grommets, you're going to need a piece of interfacing, and I'm just using a small piece of SF101. You don't want your grommet holes to stretch out, or else your grommets will fall out. You are also going to need some interfacing for your pocket opening, and I'm using a knit interfacing. A knit interfacing, it has stretch in one direction and no stretch in the other direction. You're also going to want some pins or clips, your basic sewing supplies, scissors, rulers. And as for sewing machines, I will be using a 4-thread serger, but you definitely can use a basic sewing machine, but you want to make sure that it has a stretch stitch or a zigzag. We are making clothes, so you want your stitches to be able to stretch, and if you don't use a stretch stitch, they will pop. I will also be using a cover stitch for the top stitching. Again, you can use your sewing machine for that. And if you are using a serger, you're going to want a sewing machine that has a stretch stitch for the front pocket construction. One of my favorite things about Sinclair Patterns is they draft their patterns in 3 different heights. Most companies only draft lady patterns for a height of 5'5", and if you're taller than that or shorter than that, you'll have to slice and add or take away height, which can be super time consuming. So you're going to need to determine what pattern height you need and download the correct file. Then you're going to need to take your chest, waist, and hip measurements and figure out where you fall on the sizing chart. Now, don't worry if you're not a straight size. You can grade your pattern pieces to fit your measurements. Now we need to print the pattern. I use Acrobat Reader to do this, and this program allows you to turn off all the size layers that you don't need. Now, once you're in the program, you want to go to where your pattern is, and mine is in my downloads. You want to select the pattern and click open. Then you can go to the left side panel and click the layers button on the bottom. It'll look like a little stack of paper. You now can click on all the eyeballs to turn off the sizes that you don't need. And once you're left with only your sizes, you can go up to the printer icon at the top bar and your printer dialog box will come up. And you can either print all the pages or you can print a range of pages. You want to make sure that you're printing at a scale of 100%, and then you can print the pattern. All right, so you have your pattern printed. Now we need to make sure that it printed at the correct scale. So on page number 1, there's going to be a scale box with a 4-inch line and a 10-centimeter line. So you want to take your ruler and make sure that either one of those is the correct length. Here I'm measuring the 4-inch line and it's 4 inches, so I know that my pattern printed at the correct scale. So now when you're piecing your pattern together, there's going to be some solid blue dots and some dotted lines. You want to place your dotted lines and those solid blue dots on top of each other, which will then cause the black circle and X to become complete. And you also want to check that your sizing line is lined up. I like to use glue for pattern piecing, but you can also definitely use tape. Each page has this grid and it indicates what page number you're on, and then it shows you how many pages are in that row and column. Definitely super helpful. You're going to finish putting together your entire pattern. There's a lot of pages. It's huge. So once you get that together, we will be back. As I mentioned earlier, you can grade between sizes if you need to. So before cutting out your paper pattern, you want to take your ruler and put it on the point you're going from and the other end on the point you're going to and draw your line. Here I went from a medium chest to a large waist. And then I added in a little bit of a curve to bring it in at the waist a little bit so it wasn't a straight line. You want to do this to all the pieces that you need graded. And then you can cut out all your paper pattern pieces, making sure that you cut out on the correct lines. We now have all of our pattern pieces cut out. We can go ahead and get cutting with the fabric. I like to start by sorting the pattern pieces with the fabrics that they're going to be cut in. This way I don't accidentally cut the wrong pieces with the wrong fabrics. So when you're cutting your fabric, you want to make sure you're cutting the fabric in the right direction. If you're using directional fabric, it's obviously going to be easier to figure this out. But if you're using a solid, you can stretch the fabric and you'll see these lines. You want these lines to be going vertical and the selvage edge to be on the side. Each pattern piece says how many you need to cut. You want to pay attention to if it says mirrored. For example, the hood says cut 2 exterior and 2 linings mirrored. You can do this one of 2 ways. You can lay your fabric with the right side up and cut one piece, and then you can flip the pattern over and cut out the mirrored piece. Or you can fold your fabric right sides together, making sure your fabric is nice and neat. And you can place your pattern piece right side up, and this will give you your 2 mirrored images with one less step. When you're cutting your pieces, make sure your fabric is right side up and the stretch is going the correct way. You also want to make sure you're cutting out the notches because these are going to be future reference points for when we're sewing everything together. Okay, I just wanted to show you real quick. I decided to cut the hood with right sides together to give me my 2 mirrored images. So I just wanted to show you what that would look like if you did do that. So I had my right sides together. So when I take them apart, I have two mirrored images. The little piece of advice that I wanted to give you is if you're using a panel for your front pocket, just be aware of your placement because the front of your hoodie is cut into two pieces, the seam kind of going across part of your chest at an angle. So just be careful with how you're placing your panel because it could end up a lot lower than you really want it to. You now have all your pieces cut out. I would recommend keeping your pattern pieces with each of your cuts so that you know what is what. So I have my waistband, my drawstrings, which I had to cut a little bit different because I didn't have enough. My cuffs, my left and right panel, my 4 mirrored hoods, my front panels, my pocket panels. And then the sleeves, I did decide last minute to do some color blocking on the sleeve. Color blocking is super fun and pretty easy. All you need to do is determine what and where you want your color block. I wanted my sleeve and I wanted the points when sewn together to meet in the middle. So I drew my lines, cut out on those lines, and then I had to add in my seam allowance to each piece that I cut. So the smaller of the pieces had 2 cut lines, so I had to add the 1/4 of a seam allowance to each of those 2 sides. And then again on the bigger piece, 2 sides were cut, so I had to add a seam allowance. And then the last piece, only one side was cut, so only a 1/4 of an inch was added to there. Pay attention to if your pattern piece says mirrored. You'll want to cut out all your pieces cut out face up, and then all your pieces cut out face down. That'll give you your mirrored pieces. And then when I sewed it together, I sewed on the smaller section, sewed it, top stitch it, which gave me the placement for the longer piece. So I sewed that on and then I top stitched it, and that gave me my sleeves. All right, so we got everything printed, put together, and cut out. So you should have all your pieces. Go ahead and post your picture in the Fandea Fabric Sew Along Facebook group to the corresponding day, and we will come back tomorrow and start sewing and constructing our front pocket.